The morning I found out my son had taken $43,000 from me, I was standing in my kitchen in my bathrobe making oatmeal. The gas burner was hissing its low blue hiss. The maple tree outside the window was going yellow at the edges, the way it always did in late September. And I was adding brown sugar to the pot, the way I had done every weekday morning for 31 years, because that is simply what you do in September. You eat oatmeal, you watch the maple, you add the brown sugar. And then I looked at the number on the screen of my phone, and I stood there with the spoon in my hand and the sugar dissolving and the oatmeal going thick at the bottom, and I thought, that cannot be right. It was right. Every last cent of it was right. I did not throw the spoon. I did not sit down. I stirred the oatmeal, turned off the burner, ate standing at the counter, rinsed the bowl, set it in the rack to dry, and then I went and found my green notebook, and I sat at the kitchen table, and I started writing numbers. Because $43,000 does not disappear by accident, and I had kept this notebook for 31 years, and I was not about to stop now. By the time I finished my coffee, the number had grown to $51,420, and I knew exactly where it had gone. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it started. It always starts so gently that you don't notice until it's much too late. My name is Dorothy Greer, Dot to everyone who has known me for more than 20 minutes. I am 69 years old, which I am aware sounds like the kind of age people describe as a certain age, in a tone that implies you've become decorative and slightly confused. I am neither. I worked as a certified public accountant for 30 years, commercial accounts, small business taxes, estate planning, and I retired at 63, not because I had to, but because I had saved enough and because my husband Frank had just been diagnosed with the thing that would take him from me in 2 years, and I wanted those 2 years. I got them. They were hard, and they were also the most honest 2 years of my life, and I do not regret a single hour of them. Frank died on a Thursday afternoon in November, which I mention only because it was the most ordinary kind of day. Cold, flat gray sky, the garbage truck going by outside, and the contrast between how the world looked and what was happening in that bedroom was so absolute that I have never quite trusted ordinary days since then. Not in a dark way, just in a way that means I watch them more carefully. The house is mine. Frank and I bought it in 1987 when the street still had a hardware store on the corner and a diner 3 blocks over that has long since become a nail salon. And we paid it off by 2004. And when Frank died, the title transferred cleanly into my name alone, and there it has stayed. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen with the original sage green tile that I have steadfastly refused to replace because it is good tile and because replacing it would be giving into a trend, and a backyard with a garden that I am less passionate about than some of my friends, but which I maintain with the same attention I give everything, which is to say, methodically and without drama. Raymond, Ray, is my son. He is 42 years old, and he has my father's eyes and his own particular way of tilting his head slightly when he is about to ask you for something, a gesture so ingrained that I used to find it endearing. He works in business development, which is a phrase that has always struck me as specifically designed to resist clarification. And he has, for the past 4 years, been married to Kayla, née Finch, who is 38 and who runs what she describes as a wellness and integrative movement studio in a rented commercial space on the east side of town. I want to be fair about Kayla. I have tried very hard to be fair. When Ray brought her home the first time, she was vivid and quick and laughed easily, and seemed to genuinely enjoy his company, which was not a small thing. She called me Dot within the first hour, which I respected. She remembered things I mentioned in passing, that I preferred my coffee with exactly 1 sugar, that I had a weakness for lemon pound cake, that I found most reality television baffling, but would watch a well-made documentary about almost anything. She remembered these things and she deployed them, and for a long time I thought that was simply the behavior of someone who paid attention and liked people. It took me a long time to understand that she also deployed them with the same precision a person uses when they are assembling something specific. The first thing I noticed, and at the time I noticed it only as a texture, an atmosphere, not yet as information, was how quickly the apartment filled up with conversations I had not started. Money conversations. Not asking conversations, not yet. Assessment conversations. How's the market in this neighborhood doing, Dot? Frank's insurance must have been solid. Those are always good policies from that era. You must feel so settled in this house. The questions arrived wrapped in warmth, so neatly packaged that I felt rude even clocking them as questions. I told myself I was being uncharitable. I told myself that of course a young couple interested in their own financial future would be interested in what good planning looked like. I told myself a lot of things in those early months. I was wrong about all of them. Ray had always been a man who needed things to be smooth. That is not a criticism. It is simply an accurate description. He did not like conflict, did not like uncertainty, did not like the feeling of things unresolved. When he was small, he would cry at the end of movies, not because they were sad, but because they were over, because the known world of the story was closing. And I used to hold him and say the story kept going after the credits, and he would look at me with this specific expression of having decided to believe something he wasn't sure he believed. He had grown into a man who still looked for people to reassure him. He had found, in Kayla, someone very willing to provide that reassurance, provided the arrangement ran in the correct direction. The business trouble started, or rather was announced, 14 months ago. Ray called me on a Sunday evening in July, which was unusual because Ray almost always texted, and his voice had that particular flatness that I had learned over 42 years meant he was managing something that he found embarrassing. "Mom," he said, and then there was a pause, and I heard the small sound of Kayla saying something in the background, and then he said, "I need to talk to you about something." He told me the business was having cash flow problems. He said it carefully, the way someone rehearsed says a careful thing, with the pauses in the right places and the reassurances preloaded. It's not serious. It's temporary. It's just a timing issue. Cash flow stuff like this happens all the time. He said he needed to make 1 payment. 1. He was specific about it being 1. And that if he could use my account to route the transfer, it would look better on paper for the business loan he was currently applying for. He asked if he could have access to my checking account for 2 weeks, just 2 weeks, just to make the 1 payment. I am a retired accountant. I know what that sentence means when it arrives wrapped in that particular warmth and that specific reassurance. I know it means I have already decided you will say yes, and I have shaped the request so that saying no will feel like a failure of love rather than a reasonable financial decision. I said yes. I am not proud of it. But I said yes because he was my son, and because the manipulation was good, and because I told myself the same story I had been quietly being told. It was temporary. It was 1 payment. It was family. 2 weeks became 4. 4 weeks became 8. The 1 payment became a standing authorization I did not fully realize I had given. The cash flow problems remained cash flow problems in the same way that a leak remains a leak when you point a fan at it instead of fixing the pipe. But what I did not understand yet, what I would not understand until that September morning with the oatmeal and the brown sugar and the number on the phone screen, was that the money was not going to raise business at all. That September was a warm one, the kind that arrives in the Northeast like a small apology for what October will bring. And the maple in my backyard was still green except at the very tips. I had my Ledger Club meeting the following Friday, which I was looking forward to in the specific way I always look forward to it. Not with excitement exactly, but with the settled feeling of something structurally important on the calendar, a load-bearing point. The Ledger Club has been meeting for 11 years. There are 5 of us, myself, Beverly Coldwell, 68, who was a tax auditor for the IRS for 24 years, and whose opinion of most financial arrangements is unprintable. Josephine Bright, who goes by Jo and is 66, and teaches part-time at the community college, and laughs at things other people decide are too dry to be funny. Helen Park, 70, who is quiet in company and vicious at the mahjong table. And Margaret Osei, 67, who is a retired judge and who brings her opinions to the table with the same authority she brought them to the bench, which is to say, without much concern for whether you asked for them. We play mahjong. We have played mahjong together since Jo came back from a trip to San Francisco and bought a set on impulse and said, "Does anyone know how to play this?" at what was then just a dinner party. And one thing became another, and now we meet every 2 weeks in rotation at each other's houses with the tile set and a bottle of wine and the tacit agreement that the mahjong is the frame and the conversation is the painting. That Friday, it was Helen's turn to host, and she had made the Korean pancakes she made every time it was her turn because they were excellent and because she had decided years ago that a good host makes the things they make well, rather than attempting variety. And she was right. I arrived with a Côte de Rhône that Bev immediately assessed with a look and declared acceptable, which from Bev is enthusiastic praise. We played 2 hands before I said anything. I had not planned to say anything at all. I was still in the mode of keeping things inside until I understood them. The accountant's mode of don't speak the number until you can footnote it. But somewhere in the middle of the second hand, Bev looked at me over her tiles and said, in the tone of someone who has been watching and waiting, "You've got that face." "What face?" I said. "The one," Jo said without looking up from her tiles, "where something's wrong but you've decided it's not polite to say so." "I don't have a face," I said. "Dot," Margaret said, "you've been holding the same 3 tiles for 7 minutes. You never do that. Play or tell us." Helen refilled my wine glass without being asked. I put the tiles down. I told them about the bank account. I told them about the Sunday call, the 2 weeks, the 1 payment. I did not tell them the number yet. I told them what I had found that morning on my phone, the amount in the account that should not have been the amount in the account. The room was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of people who don't know what to say, the quiet of people who know exactly what to say and are deciding whether this is the moment to say it. "How much?" Bev said. Not a question, an instruction. "As of this morning," I said, $51,420. Bev set down her tiles. She picked up her wine. She drank half of it. She set the glass down. "That son of a bitch," she said. "Bev," Jo said. "I'm sorry, Jo, but no. $51,000. That's not a mistake. That's not a cash flow situation. That is a plan." "We don't know the full picture yet," Margaret said. She was looking at me, not at Bev. Dot, how long has he had access to the account? 14 months, I said. Margaret nodded in the way she nodded when a number confirmed something she had already calculated. She did not say what she was thinking. She picked up her tiles, looked at them, put them back down. Okay, she said. Tell me everything, from the beginning. Don't edit. I told them everything. By the time I finished, Joe had opened the second bottle, and Helen had brought out the pancakes again because, as she said simply, you should eat something when you're saying hard things. It helps. The plan that emerged that evening was not stated as a plan. That was one of the things I had learned to love about these women. They never quite said what they were going to do, especially when what they were going to do was significant. Bev mentioned that she still had contacts at the IRS field office and that she found it interesting, from a technical standpoint, that a wellness studio with the client volume Kayla claimed to have would have a specific kind of paper trail that was either present or notably absent. Joe mentioned that her nephew was a family law attorney and that she was sure he would be happy to have coffee with an old friend of his aunt's. Margaret said nothing at all about what she was going to do, which, with Margaret, meant she was already doing it. We're just 5 retired ladies having a nice dinner, Joe said, refilling glasses around the table. Playing mahjong, Helen added. Completely innocent, Bev said. $51,000. She said it once more, flatly, like stamping a document. Completely innocent. I drove home through the warm September night with the windows down, the smell of someone burning leaves somewhere a few streets over, and I sat in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside. The house looked the same as it always looked at night, the porch light on, the maple a dark shape against the dark sky. Frank had installed that porch light in 1991. He had climbed a ladder while I held it steady and told him he was too tall for the ladder, and he had said, Dot, I am 41 years old. I think I can manage a light fixture, in the affectionate, exasperated tone that was the particular music of our marriage, and the light had worked ever since. I went inside, locked the door, set my bag on the chair by the door, and went to the kitchen and got the green notebook out of the drawer where I kept it. The green notebook is a composition book, the old-fashioned kind with the marbled cover, and I have kept one like it since 1989. I have a shelf of them in the office, 31 of them in chronological order, each one labeled on the spine with the year. Frank used to call them my flight recorder. He meant it affectionately, but he was also accurate. If anything had ever gone wrong and someone needed to understand the financial history of our household in complete and verifiable detail, those notebooks would tell them everything. Every mortgage payment, every insurance premium, every home repair, every grocery bill averaged over quarters to catch drift, every gift given and received. I was not a suspicious person. I was a thorough one. Those are different things, and the distinction had never mattered until now. I opened the current notebook to the last entry, and I started a new section. At the top, I wrote, Raymond. Review begins. And then I began writing down everything I remembered, in order, with dates. The phone call came on a Tuesday, 8 days after the Ledger Club meeting. I was in the garden, not doing anything ambitious, just cutting back the last of the dahlias, which had gone leggy, when my phone buzzed with Ray's number, and I looked at it for 1 ring, 2 rings, before I answered. Hey, Mom, he said. Hey, so, are you home? We thought we might come by this weekend, just to check in, see how you're doing. Kayla wants to show you some stuff she's been working on with the studio. This weekend works, I said. I made my voice exactly as warm as it had always been. Saturday? Saturday's perfect. We'll bring lunch. Wonderful, I said. I'll make sure the coffee's on. I hung up and stood in the garden with the dahlia stems in my gloved hand and the autumn sun flat and yellow on the grass, and I thought, good. Come and show me what you're working on. Let's all sit down and have a very nice lunch. Because I was not ready yet. Not quite. I had the notebook, but I needed more. I needed to understand the full architecture of it before I said a word. Because once I said a word, the word could not be unsaid. And I had spent 30 years knowing that the most expensive mistake in any financial matter is the one you make before you have all the information. I finished cutting back the dahlias. I went inside and washed my hands and called Joe's nephew, whose name was David, and I made an appointment for Thursday afternoon. The Thursday appointment was in a small office on the third floor of a building downtown that smelled of carpet and old paper. The smell of modest legal work competently done. And David Bright was 34 and had his aunt's quick eyes and a stillness that I recognized as the professional composure of someone who has learned to sit with difficult information without showing it on his face. He listened to me for 40 minutes. He looked at the copies of the bank statements I had brought, the ones I had printed at the library rather than at home, because I was not ready for that particular paper trail to exist on my own printer. He looked at the notebook, the relevant pages. He made notes in a yellow legal pad, small, precise notes in the upper right corner of each page. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "How long have you worked in accounting?" 30 years, I said. CPA, primarily commercial and estate work. He nodded. There was something in his expression that was not quite sympathy. It was more specific than that, something like recognition. "Mrs. Greer," he said, "the documentation you have is good. It's not complete. We'd want the actual authorization form you signed, and we'd want the business records for your son's company to establish where the money actually went. But what you have here is a foundation." He paused. "I want to be direct with you. The amount is significant enough that this is not a family conversation with raised voices. This is a civil matter at minimum, and potentially a criminal one. Do you understand what I mean by that?" "I spent 30 years doing estate planning," I said. "I understand exactly what you mean." He wrote a name on the card, a forensic accountant he worked with on financial misconduct cases, and said he would need 2 weeks to pull together a full picture. I gave him every piece of paper I had. I drove home in the late afternoon, the sun low and orange, the kind of October light that makes everything look like a Hopper painting. And I stopped at the grocery store for coffee and the specific Italian cookies that I always served when Ray and Kayla came for lunch, because I was going to serve them at Saturday's lunch as if nothing had changed. And I was going to sit across the table from my son and his wife, and I was going to be exactly as warm and unremarkable as I had always been. And I was going to wait. Kayla arrived on Saturday in the kind of outfit that suggests someone has spent money pretending not to have spent money. Expensive linen trousers, a silk blouse in a dusty rose that was almost the exact color of expensive things that don't want you to notice they're expensive. Ray was in jeans and a jacket, the good jacket, the one he wore when he was trying to create a particular impression. They brought a bag from the good deli downtown. Sourdough, good cheese, the little cornichons I like. "It looks so good in here, Dot," Kayla said, coming in through the front door with the ease of someone who has decided to be at home in a place that is not theirs. She touched the frame of the hall mirror as she passed it, a small, proprietorial gesture that I noted and filed. The dining room was warm, and the coffee was on, and the cookies were on the table, and I had set the table properly, the way I always set it for people I love. And the green notebook was not on the table. The green notebook was in the kitchen drawer where it always lived. We ate, we talked. Ray was more animated than usual, a higher energy that I recognized as the energy of someone who has made a decision and is managing the anxiety around it. He talked about the business, vaguely positive. Things are looking up, there are some good conversations happening. The kind of language that is specifically designed to sound like information while communicating nothing. Kayla talked about the studio. She talked about it at length and with considerable fluency. The classes, the new instructor she had hired, the partnership she was developing with a local physical therapy group, the social media following that was growing really organically, which is the only way I believe in doing it. I listened. I asked questions. I was genuinely curious in the specific way I am curious about things that are not quite what they present themselves as. After lunch, after the coffee, after Ray had excused himself to use the bathroom, Kayla leaned forward slightly across the table, and her expression shifted in a way that was barely perceptible, a millimeter's worth of shift from warm to something more precise. "Dot," she said, "can I ask you something? And I hope you don't mind me being direct because I feel like you're someone who appreciates directness." "Go ahead," I said. "Ray and I have been talking a lot about the future, about planning, and I know this house is so important to you and to your memories with Frank. It really is such a beautiful house, and you've kept it so wonderfully. And I just wonder sometimes whether you think about what makes the most sense long term. Whether you've talked to anyone about, estate planning. Whether the arrangement that made sense when Frank was here still makes the most sense for where you are now." I looked at her. I let a beat pass, just one beat. And in that beat, I looked at the small silver necklace she was wearing, and the manicure that was recent, and the linen trousers that were, I estimated, $250 at minimum. And I thought about the number in my notebook, and I said, "I've thought about it. I have an excellent estate attorney. Everything's quite in order." Something moved across her face, fast and well-controlled, and then the warmth came back. "Oh, that's wonderful. Of course you would. You're so organized, Dot. That's one of the things I really admire about you." And Ray came back from the bathroom, and we had the second cup of coffee, and they left at 3:00. I stood at the window and watched their car go around the corner, and then I sat at the kitchen table and opened the green notebook to the new section, and I wrote, "Saturday lunch, Kayla, probed estate/house arrangement. Timing notable. This is about the house." And then the picture got a great deal larger and a great deal worse. It was Bev who found it. Bev, who still had the particular skill set of someone who audited businesses for 24 years and knew which threads to pull and how to pull them, called me on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks after the Ledger Club meeting, with the tone of voice she uses when she has information and is moderately angry about having it. "Okay, so," she said, and I could hear the specific sound of her kitchen, the old clock, the hum of the refrigerator, and I knew she had been sitting there with this for a while. "The studio. Kayla's studio. You know how she's been in that rental space on Clement Street for 2 years? Well, I had a conversation, completely casual, with a woman I know who does commercial lease compliance for that area, and it turns out the studio is behind on its lease. Not a little behind, 5 months behind." I sat down at the kitchen table. "The studio is not making money," Bev continued. "Or it's making some money, and that money is going somewhere that isn't the rent. Either way, the business is not what she says it is, Dot. The instructor she hired? I checked the business license. There's no employer record for a second instructor. There's no W-2. The physical therapy partnership she mentioned? I looked for the liability insurance filing that would need to exist for a medical partnership of that kind. It doesn't." "Bev," I said. "I know, I'm getting there." She paused. The studio is registered as a sole proprietorship. Kayla Finch, sole owner. Not Ray, not a partnership, not a joint venture, just Kayla. So the money Ray borrowed from your account to stabilize his business went to her studio, I said. My voice was very flat and very even. That's what the picture looks like to me, Bev said. And not just the studio, Dot. I made some calls about their mortgage. The numbers don't add up for what Ray's business income would support. Someone has been supplementing. I was quiet for a moment. Outside, the maple tree was moving in a light wind, the last of its leaves, and the porch light Frank had installed in 1991 was on the way it was always on, steady and indifferent to the season. There's more, Bev said. Her voice had gone quieter, the way voices go when the information is worse than expected. I talked to someone who was a client of Kayla's, a woman, about 60. She stopped going to the studio 8 months ago. She said Kayla had suggested during a wellness consultation, that the woman's memory issues might be helped by a specific program Kayla offered. And the woman said she didn't have memory issues. And Kayla said, sometimes people don't notice their own decline, and isn't it wonderful that there are supportive people in your life who can help you navigate decisions that get harder as we get older? I felt something go very cold in my chest. Not fear, something more like recognition. She's been running the same script on other people, I said. That's what it sounds like, Bev said. The implication, suggesting cognitive decline to make someone more dependent, more willing to hand over financial decisions, that's a pattern. It's a specific pattern. I thought about Kayla at the lunch table, whether the arrangement that made sense when Frank was here still makes the most sense. I thought about Ray on the phone 14 months ago. Just 2 weeks, just one payment. You don't need to keep track of every penny anymore, Mom. I thought about what the full sentence had been. Mom, you don't need to keep track of every penny anymore. Just relax. And how I had noticed the sentence and filed it and told myself I was being uncharitable. I had not been uncharitable. I had been accurate. I had simply not been ready to act on the accuracy yet. Thank you, Bev, I said. Dot, she said. I'm sorry. Don't be, I said. I'm not. I hung up and sat at the table, and I looked at the green notebook, and then I got up and went to the shelf in the office where the 31 composition books sat in their chronological row, and I took out 3 of them, 2019, 2020, 2021, and I brought them back to the kitchen table, and I started cross-referencing. It took me 4 hours. By the time I was done, it was past midnight, and the house was very quiet. And I had a sheet of paper with a complete accounting going back to before Ray had called me about the business, back to when the requests had been smaller, quieter, the kind you agree to because they are still inside the zone of normal family accommodation. The numbers were not ambiguous. They had never been ambiguous. I had simply not assembled them into a single column before. The total, over 23 months, was $68,240. I sat with that number for a little while. Then I got up, made myself a cup of tea, and started writing the list of what needed to happen next. I should tell you about the iguana. Her name was Phoebe, she was 3 years old, and she belonged to my tenant Simone, who had moved into the spare room in October. The spare room that had been Ray's room when he was a boy, and which I had repurposed as a guest room after he left for college, and which I had decided, 3 weeks after the Ledger Club meeting, to rent out to a graduate student for $800 a month, a decision that I had mentioned to no one in my family because it was my house and my decision, and I had not been asked for a justification. Simone was 27, a doctoral student in environmental biology, and she was quiet and respectful and paid her rent electronically on the first of every month with the punctuality of someone who knows what it means not to pay rent. And the only complicating factor was Phoebe, who was approximately 18 inches from snout to tail, and who spent most of her time on a heated shelf in Simone's room, but who was occasionally in the living room on a leash made of braided hemp, because Simone was, among other things, someone who braided things out of hemp, looking out the window at the backyard with an expression of complete serene indifference to the concerns of mammals. I had come to find Phoebe restful. Ray did not know about Simone yet. Ray did not know I had a tenant. He found out on the Saturday in late November when he arrived with Kayla for what he called, "Just a quick visit, Mom. Just wanted to see you," and walked through the front door and found Phoebe on her leash in the living room, 17 inches of ancient evolutionary certainty, sitting in a rectangle of pale winter sunlight, regarding the newcomers without alarm or interest. Ray stopped. He actually stopped walking and stood in the doorway. "Mom," he said, "what is that?" "That's Phoebe," I said, coming through from the kitchen with the coffee tray. "She belongs to Simone. Simone is renting your old room." Kayla was looking at Phoebe the way people look at things they find conceptually challenging. Phoebe was looking at the middle distance. "You have a tenant," Ray said. "I do," I said. "Lovely girl. Environmental biology PhD. Very quiet." "Mom, you could have told us." "It's my house, Ray," I said pleasantly. I set the coffee tray on the table. "Sit down. I've got the good cookies." Simone emerged from the hallway at that moment, on her way out, in her coat, looking at her phone. She looked up, registered Ray and Kayla without visible concern, said, "Oh, hi, you must be Dorothy's son. I'm Simone. Nice to meet you." Picked up Phoebe's leash from the hook by the door. Phoebe's transportation infrastructure had expanded to include a small padded tote, into which Phoebe stepped with complete dignity and left. Kayla watched the door close. "The lizard it has a bag," she said. "Bag," I said. "Yes. She goes to the library sometimes. Simone says the graduate students find her calming." There was a beat of silence, during which Ray looked at Kayla, and Kayla looked at the door, and Phoebe was gone, and the room was just a room. "Right," Ray said, and sat down. The conversation that followed was the conversation I had been expecting and had been preparing for over the previous 3 weeks. And I had the advantage of knowing it was coming, while they had the disadvantage of having only partly decided how to begin it. Kayla was the one who opened it, in the way she always opened things, obliquely, warmly, with the specific syntax of someone who has been told that you catch more flies with honey. "Dot, Ray and I have been talking a lot, and we're a little worried about you. You seem a little, and I say this with total love, a little scattered lately. Just, small things. The tenant, which I'm sure is lovely, but it's also a lot to manage. And I know when Frank died, things got complicated. And it feels to us like maybe having someone more closely involved in helping you manage things." "What things?" I said. "Just the house, the finances, the day-to-day. Someone to help you keep track." I looked at her. Then I looked at Ray. Ray had the decency to look at the table. "Ray," I said, "when did I last keep track of a household expense incorrectly?" He didn't answer. "When did I miss a bill? When did I overdraw an account? When did I fail to file a tax return on time? When did I make a financial decision that was not informed and documented and correct?" I picked up my coffee cup. "I'm asking for a specific instance. Take your time." Mom, it's not about when, I said in exactly the same tone, and there was nothing in my voice that was raised or sharp. It was the same temperature all the way through, and that was worse. The silence stretched. It's not about that, Kayla said. It's about support. It's about having people around you. It's about, I have people around me, I said. I have a tenant who braids hemp and a group of friends I've known for 11 years and an attorney and an accountant and a garden that is perfectly adequate. I have an excellent support system. Thank you for your concern. They left 40 minutes later, Kayla with the tight smile of someone who has reached a dead end and is reassessing the map. Ray with the expression of a man who is standing in two places at once and finding neither comfortable. I watched them from the window, and then I sat at the table and I wrote one line in the notebook. They moved today. Next will be direct. I was right. The direct move came 8 days later, and it came not from Ray alone or Kayla alone, but from both of them together. And it came to the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening with a stack of papers and a pen and the specific energy of people who have decided that the window is closing and the moment is now. I opened the door and I saw the papers under Ray's arm, and I felt something in my chest go very quiet and very hard, the way iron goes quiet when it's been in the furnace long enough. And I stepped back and let them in. They sat across from me at the kitchen table, which was the table Frank had built in the garage in 1993. Solid oak, the kind of table that does not move when you put your hands flat on it and push. Kayla had a leather portfolio. Ray had the stack of papers. The papers were printed documents, not handwritten, and they were heavy with the specific weight of things prepared by someone who expected to present them. Dot, Kayla began. We know this is a lot to take in, and we want you to know this comes from a place of love. Purely love. We've been talking to a financial consultant. Which one? I said. She paused, barely. He's someone Ray works with. He's helped us think through what would make the most sense for you long term. And one of the things he suggested was looking at how your assets are structured. The house especially. The equity in this house is significant, and having it sitting in a property that one person is maintaining alone. I have a tenant, I said. Right, of course, but the thing is, Dot, there are real tax advantages to a different kind of ownership structure. If you were to add Ray to the deed, for example, just as a co-owner, nothing changes about your living here. You stay here forever, of course. Kayla, I said. She stopped. Is this the document? I said, and I pointed at the papers under Ray's arm. Ray looked at Kayla. Kayla nodded, slightly. Ray put the papers on the table. They were a deed transfer document, prepared, filled in, requiring only my signature. The property being transferred? My house. The new co-owner? Raymond Greer. I looked at it for a moment. Then I looked at Ray. How long has your studio been behind on rent? I said. Kayla's face went very still. 5 months, I said, or thereabouts. And the instructor you hired? There's no W-2 on file. And the physical therapy partnership? No liability insurance filing. I watched Ray. His jaw was working. And the business loan you told me you needed the account access for? I had David Bright pull the business records. There was no loan application. There was no business cash flow problem. The money, $68,240 over 23 months, went to the studio lease, your mortgage, and what I believe is a home renovation on a property that is not mine. Ray stood up so abruptly that the chair scraped. Mom, sit down, Ray, I said. I said it quietly, without heat, and he sat down because he had heard that tone once before in his life, when he was 17 and had told me a lie about where he had been. And he had learned then that the quiet ones are the ones that mean what they say. It wasn't. The studio was having a rough patch and we thought it would be temporary, and Kayla was working on the partnerships, and I was going to pay it back, Mom. I am going to pay it back. The business is going to— Ray, I said, I have the bank records, the authorization form you had me sign, and 23 months of entries in this notebook. I put my hand flat on the green notebook on the table beside me. I have a forensic accountant who has reviewed them. I have a family law attorney who has reviewed the deed transfer document you just tried to get me to sign. And I have in my email a message from a woman named Sandra Chu, who was a client of Kayla's studio and who was told during a wellness consultation that her memory problems she does not have, might benefit from Kayla's special program. I paused. Would you like me to continue? Kayla's face had changed entirely. The warmth was gone, not gradually, but completely, the way a lamp goes out when the bulb fails. There is no dimming, there is just before and after. Her eyes were calculating now, fast and flat, the eyes of someone running numbers on exits. You don't actually have— those records aren't— you can't just— She stopped. Recalculated. Dot, I think you've misunderstood the situation. What Ray and I were trying to do— I understand the situation perfectly, I said. I was a certified public accountant for 30 years. I understand the situation better than the consultant you hired, whose name you declined to give me, which tells me something about the quality of the advice. I picked up my coffee cup. The coffee was cool. I drank it anyway. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to take the deed transfer document and leave this house. Ray, you and I will speak with our respective attorneys. There will be a repayment arrangement. It will be documented and legally binding, and it will include interest because I am not a bank making a charitable loan. I am a person whose money was taken without full disclosure of the purpose. Jesus, Mom, Ray said, and his voice broke on the last word, not into anger, but into something younger, something closer to the boy who had cried at the end of movies. I felt it. Of course I felt it. He was my son, and I had loved him since before I knew what loving someone at that scale would cost. And the break in his voice went somewhere real and specific in my chest, and I did not allow it to change anything. Ray, I said, and my voice was not unkind. I love you. I have loved you for 42 years without condition, and that does not change today. But you took my money, and you allowed someone to suggest, to my face, at my own table, that I was not capable of managing my own life, and that is something I will not accommodate. Do you understand me? He looked at the table. His jaw was set. He nodded once. Kayla, I said, turning to look at her directly, I know what you were building. The financial dependence first, the cognitive suggestions second, the deed transfer third. It's a competent sequence. The only thing you didn't account for is that I have kept a complete financial record of this household for 31 years, every penny. Not because I'm a suspicious person, because I'm a thorough one. Kayla said nothing. Her face was very controlled and very blank. The difference between those two things, I said, is what's going to matter in the coming weeks. They left. Ray took the deed transfer document. Neither of them spoke again. I locked the door after them and stood in the hallway for a moment, and the house was very quiet. The particular quiet of after. And then from somewhere upstairs, I heard the faint sound of Simone's television. Something nature documentary from the sound of it, and Phoebe's heating shelf made its small hum, and the house felt inhabited and warm and entirely mine, and I went to the kitchen and made myself a fresh cup of coffee and sat at the table with the green notebook and wrote down everything that had just been said in order with the time noted at the top. Tuesday, November 14th, 7:22 p.m. The night before I met with David Bright to formalize the complaint, I did not sleep. Not in a distressed way, not the ragged, wakeful misery of someone whose mind is running from something. More the clean insomnia of someone whose mind is running toward something, checking the route, walking the path, making sure nothing has been left behind. I got up at 3 in the morning and made tea, chamomile, Frank's preference, not mine, but I made it for him in the nights when he couldn't sleep. And now I made it for myself in the same way. A habit that had lost its original occasion and found a new one. And I sat at the kitchen table with the tea and the green notebook, and I read through everything I had written since September, from beginning to end. The tea cooled while I read. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere on the block, a dog barked once and stopped. The maple tree outside the window was bare now, just the shape of it against the darker shape of the November sky. What I was feeling, I thought, was not anger exactly. Anger I had felt. I had felt it in the white moment of reading the bank statement, had felt it in the long, careful conversation at the kitchen table when Kayla described my own house as an asset whose structure needed reconsidering. What I felt now was something older and more settled. The feeling you get when you have been carrying something heavy for a long time and you have finally set it down in the right place. I thought about Ray at 17, asking me to drive him to his friend Marcus's house, and the specific set of his face when I had said yes without the interrogation he'd expected, and how he had turned in the car seat to look at me and said, "You're not going to ask me anything?" And I had said no because I trusted him, and he had been quiet for a moment and then said, "Okay, thank you, Mom," and then had gone to Marcus's house, which I later discovered was exactly where he said he was going, doing exactly what he said he was doing. He had been, for many years, a person it was possible to trust. I did not know when that had changed, or whether the change was in him or in the proximity to Kayla's particular vision of what was possible. I was not sure it mattered for the purposes of what needed to happen next. What mattered was the record. What mattered was the $68,240 and the deed transfer document and the client who had been told she had memory problems she did not have. I closed the notebook. I went upstairs. I lay down, not expecting to sleep, and I was asleep within minutes. In the morning, I showered and dressed in the navy blazer I had bought in 2018 for Frank's memorial service and had worn a handful of times since. And I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at my reflection with the equanimity of someone who has made a decision and is ready to proceed. And I thought, 69 years old, 30 years of balance sheets, 2 years of watching Frank be braver than I knew how to be, and one green notebook with 31 pages of cross-reference transactions. I thought, let's go. David Bright's office did not look different on the day I came to formalize the complaint. Same carpet smell, same old paper, same yellow legal pads. What was different was the second chair at the table, which was occupied by a woman named Patricia Gomez, who was the forensic accountant David worked with and who had the steady, unimpressed eyes of someone who had reviewed a great many financial statements and been surprised by none of them. She spread the documents on the table in a particular order, not chronologically, but by type. Bank records here, business registration documents there, the record of the studio's late lease, the W-2 absence, the mortgage timeline, and she walked through them with the specific efficiency of a person who has prepared this presentation more than once and has long since stopped finding any human capacity for self-deception remarkable. The total unauthorized withdrawals from your account are $68,240, she said. Of that, I can trace $44,900 to the studio's operating costs, rent, supplies, 2 direct payments to what appears to be a contractor who did renovation work on the studio space. An additional $11,000 went to the mortgage on your son's property. The remaining $12,340 went to a Visa account in Kayla Finch's name. Personal spending, from what I can see. Personal spending, I said. Clothing, travel, a spa. Nothing unusual in terms of what the category is, just unusual in terms of where the money came from. She paused. I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it before you answer. Is it your intention to file a criminal complaint or a civil claim, or both? I had thought about this. I had thought about it in the 3 o'clock tea and the hour before sleeping and on the drive downtown in the navy blazer. Both, I said. Patricia nodded, as if this were the answer she would have given. The civil claim recovers the money, David said. The criminal complaint, potential wire fraud, financial elder abuse, depending on how the DA's office wants to characterize it, does something else. It creates a record. It affects Kayla's ability to run a business that involves financial consultation with clients. It means what she was building with the cognitive decline narrative has actual legal weight attached to it. Sandra Chu, I said. We've spoken to Sandra Chu, David said. She's prepared to provide a statement. Good, I said. Then yes, both. I told the Ledger Club on the following Friday, which was my turn to host. I had made the olive and rosemary focaccia, and the good wine was open, and the mahjong set was on the table, though we barely touched it that evening, because what we were really there to do was sit together in the way you sit together when something is over, and the reckoning is complete, and what remains is simply to be with people you trust. Bev arrived with a bottle of something she described as appropriately celebratory but not vulgar, and an expression that meant she had already heard most of it from her own sources and was waiting to see if my account matched. Jo came with her big laugh and a pan of brownies and sat down with the immediate comfort of someone who has been here before, in this room, in this configuration, with this particular group of women navigating something real. Helen, characteristically, said very little and was the most present person in the room. Margaret arrived last, with no food and no wine, and instead a manila folder, which she set on the edge of the table and which she did not open until the second glass, and then she said, I did speak to Judge Harmon, who will be assigned to the civil case. Not about the case, about other things. He mentioned that financial elder abuse cases have become a priority area for this circuit. She paused. I thought that was interesting. Incredibly interesting, Bev said. Coincidentally. Completely coincidentally, Margaret agreed. I looked around the table at these 5 women, the tax auditor, the lawyer, the academic, the judge, the retired nurse I hadn't mentioned, which was Helen, who said very little, but who, it turned out, had years ago provided care for an elderly woman in a similar situation, and whose testimony about the pattern of behavior Kayla had demonstrated with Sandra Chu was going to be more useful than I had initially understood. And I felt something that I did not have a clean word for, something between gratitude and solidarity and the specific love you have for people who show up with their whole selves and their whole competence and don't make you ask twice. Thank you, I said. Oh, don't, Bev said. Don't you dare go sentimental on me. I'll never forgive you. She means it, Jo said. She's been insufferable since she found the studio lease thing. Walked around for a week saying, 24 years of this job and I can still do it. I said it twice, Bev said. You said it 14 times, Helen said, with absolute serenity, and the table fell apart laughing. The civil proceedings took 4 months. Ray's attorney was a man named Kowalczyk, who worked from a building near the highway, and who had, from what David told me, advised Ray to settle early and avoid a protracted case given the documentation. Ray, to his credit, and probably to his own surprise, took the advice. The settlement was signed on a Thursday in March. The full amount, $68,240 plus interest, which came to just over $71,000, was to be repaid in structured installments over 3 years, secured against Ray's share of the equity in his property. It was legally binding, notarized, witnessed, and filed. Patricia Gomez reviewed it and pronounced it sound. The criminal complaint, financial elder abuse, 1 count of wire fraud, was filed separately and was in the hands of the DA's office. Kayla had retained her own attorney, separate from Ray, which said something that did not need to be stated. The studio's lease situation and the tax irregularities I had mentioned to Bev, which Bev had mentioned to her former contact at the IRS field office in the most casual possible way, had generated what David called additional regulatory interest in Kayla's business operations. The studio closed in February. The landlord had not been entirely surprised. Sandra Chu had provided her statement. She had been, as it turned out, one of several clients of Kayla's over 3 years who had received similar consultations, similar suggestions about memory and decline, and the need for supportive oversight. The DA's office found that interesting. Ray and I did not speak during the 4 months of the civil proceedings. His attorney spoke to my attorney. I wrote him 1 letter in January, which I drafted and revised over the course of a week until every word was exactly what I meant. I told him that I loved him, that I had always loved him, and that love was not the same thing as permission, and that I hoped, when this was over, he would be willing to talk about what had happened between who he was and who he had allowed himself to become. I told him I would not send the letter again. I sent it, and I did not repeat it. He did not respond to the letter during the proceedings. He called me in April, after the settlement was signed. It was an evening call, 9 o'clock, the time he had always preferred for difficult conversations, going back to the Sunday evening 14 months ago when the first piece of this had started. I had been in the kitchen with the kettle on and the green notebook on the table, not writing in it, just having it there, the way you keep a familiar thing nearby when the weather is uncertain. "Mom," he said. "Ray," I said. A pause. I could hear him breathing, the small sound of managing something he had not rehearsed. "I'm sorry," he said. I know it doesn't undo anything. I know that. But I'm sorry." I sat down at the table. The kettle clicked off. "I know you are," I said. And then, because it was true and because there was no reason to be less than honest now, "I'm sorry too. I'm sorry you ended up somewhere where this seemed like the right thing to do." He was quiet for a moment. "Kayla and we're not," he stopped. "I think we're going to separate. I think I've been making some decisions that weren't my best decisions." "Okay," I said. Not encouraging, not dismissive, just, "Okay." Can we have dinner sometime? Not soon. Whenever you're ready. I want to talk to you." "Not soon," I said. "But yes, eventually." "Okay," he said. "Okay, yeah, okay." We hung up. I poured the tea. I sat at the table in the kitchen in the house that was mine, the house with the sage green tiles and the maple tree outside, and the porch light Frank had installed in the spring of 1991, and I thought about what eventually meant, and decided that it meant what it had always meant. Not forever, not never, but at a pace that was mine to set. Simone came down the stairs with Phoebe on her shoulder, not in the tote, just resting there, as iguanas apparently occasionally preferred to do, like a very scaly, extremely unbothered parrot, and said, "I'm making stir-fry. Do "Do you want some?" And I said yes, and she made enough for both of us, and we ate at the kitchen table while Phoebe presided over the room from the back of a chair with the ancient, untroubled dignity of something that has been on this earth for 300 million years and has seen everything it needs to see. The maple came back in May. It always surprised me that first week of May when the green started at the very tips of the branches, the smallest possible declaration that something was happening, and then within 2 weeks, the whole thing was fully leafed, extravagant and sure of itself, the way it had been every May since we planted it in 1989 when it was barely taller than Frank, and he had held the stake while I packed the soil and said, "Give it 20 years and we'll have actual shade." And I had said, "I'll hold you to that." And we had both laughed, standing in the backyard in the May sun with dirt on our hands. He was right. We got the shade. It was a Saturday morning in early May when I opened the green notebook to the section that started with Raymond. Review begins. And I read through it from the beginning to the last entry, which was the evening of Ray's April call. And then I closed the notebook and put it on the shelf with the others, its spine labeled 2024 in my handwriting. And I took the current blank one from the drawer and opened it to the first page and wrote at the top, 2025. Bev called at 10. "Mahjong is at Joe's this week," she said. "She says she's making sangria, which means she bought 2 bottles of wine and a bag of frozen fruit, so manage your expectations accordingly." "I'll bring the focaccia," I said. "Good. Also tell Simone the iguana is not invited." "Phoebe has never been invited," I said. "She attends by proximity." "She absolutely does," Bev said. "See you Friday." I made coffee. I stood at the window in my bathrobe and watched the maple, the leaves bright and new and absolutely sure of themselves in the May light. And the morning smelled of cut grass from somewhere on the block, and the coffee was dark and exactly right, the way it had been every morning for 31 years, because that is simply what you do. You add the right amount, you wait the right time, you drink it before it cools, and you pay attention. Ray had said, "Mom, you don't need to keep track of every penny anymore. Just relax." The shelf in the office held 32 composition books now in their chronological row, labeled and ordered and complete. I kept track of every penny. 40 years of every penny. That was exactly why we were here, and exactly why I was still standing. The coffee was not bitter at all.